Chapter 17:17, Rustle. Rain collected her things and hoisted the backpack onto her shoulders. The axe blade was terribly heavy, which messed with her balance a little, but she could handle it. The frightful black sword her teacher had given her was already gone, and her takai regained its shadow. She studied the familiar sword for a few moments, then sighed and sheathed it smoothly. Rain was ready to leave. But she didn't. Teacher, we might have a problem." He turned to her and raised an eyebrow in confusion. "A problem? What's the matter?" She hesitated for a moment, then awkwardly scratched the tip of her nose. "Well, you see, that explosion was much more powerful than I had expected, so all the ice is broken. How am I supposed to get back to shore?" He stared at her for a bit, then glanced at the ravaged landscape of the vast swamp. Indeed, the little island was surrounded by nothing except mud and black water, with not a single intact piece of ice in sight. The deadly expanse of treacherous sludge stretched all the way to the distant shore. Her teacher lingered for a bit, then sighed and approached her. Crouching, he pointed to his back. "Climb on, brat." Rain didn't make him ask twice. There were ways to traverse a swamp, but none that were both safe and timely. Not to mention that she had just disinfected her wound and didn't want to get it wet and dirty again. Plus, her battered body was exhausted. Why would she refuse a piggyback ride offered by a powerful deity? Climbing onto her teacher's back, Rain wrapped her arms around his neck and smiled. He lifted her like a feather, not showing any strain at all despite how thin his body looked, and headed for the swamp. Ah, how humiliating! A divine shadow like me being reduced to carrying ungrateful mundane girls. Gods are truly dead. Ignoring his grumbling, Rain rested her head on his shoulder and allowed her consciousness to drift into a relaxed state. The familiar sound of her teacher's voice was almost like a lullaby. Walking to the edge of the island, he didn't even try to slow down and stepped directly into the muddy water. However, his foot never plunged into the murky sludge. Instead, the shadows moved and coalesced into a glossy black plate under it. Then, another plate appeared as he took a step. Like that, her teacher walked across the swamp as if he was walking on a paved road, the black plates dissipating behind him after a few moments. The water sloshed and surged, but never managed to touch his leather boots. That reminds me of that time we fought the drowned in the lost temple of fallen grace, back when I was still wearing the Serpent King's crown. Who knew that I would end up becoming a swamp rickshaw one day? Damn, life is sure full of irony. Rain did not know what the words drowned, fallen grace, and Serpent King meant, but they sounded exciting. Was her teacher a king once in ancient times? No, knowing him, it was more likely that he had stolen a king's crown and wore it to gloat and boast about his nefarious deeds. The walk to the shore was both comfortable and uneventful. Rain could have climbed off her teacher's back once they reached solid ground, but he simply continued to carry her without saying anything, and so she didn't say anything either. Perhaps he saw through her bravado and realized that her condition was worse than she was letting on, and that she was too exhausted to hike through the forest while suffering the pain of her wound. Still, after a while, Rain spoke. "We should take down the corpses of the fallen awakened and give them a burial. Usually the queen would have taken the dead, but the huntsman must have prevented them from leaving on a pilgrimage to her palace, and as a result, their bones had been left unattended." Her teacher stopped. Rain couldn't see his face, but she felt a subtle change in his mood. Suddenly, the shadows populating the frozen forest seemed much deeper, and the world felt much darker. Her breath escaped as a cloud of cold vapor. Does he not want to bother with burying them? Climb off. He bent his knees, allowing Rain to stand firmly on the ground. She was a little confused. What? But then she heard it, a branch snapping somewhere behind her. Placing her hand on the hilt of her sword, Rain turned around and looked back. There she saw several human figures walking in their direction. They seemed like a cohort of awakened no. A master and his retinue, perhaps. 1, 2, 3 people. One of them was waving his hand in a friendly gesture. Before Rain could discern any details, though, something strange happened. Her teacher's hand appeared from behind and covered her eyes. She froze. What? Something was very wrong. His voice sounded very calm, too calm even, which only made Rain feel more nervous. Hey brat, listen to me very carefully. From now on and until I tell you otherwise, no matter what happens, don't open your eyes. All right? She nodded slowly. Yes, teacher. He remained silent for a moment. All right, stand here and don't move. With that, her teacher removed his hand. Rain's eyes were tightly shut, so she couldn't see anything, but she felt him walking past to stand between her and the approaching people. Their steps were drawing closer. Wrong, this is very wrong. Rain was not stunned by the fact that he had covered her eyes. What truly disturbed her was the fact that her teacher had not retreated into the shadows. In all the years that she had known him, he had never, ever shown himself to other people. It was to the point that Rain had considered him a hallucination at first. But now, her teacher remained in the open, in front of absolute strangers. Why? Her silent panic was interrupted by his bright, carefree voice. Greetings, who might you be? The sound of steps halted, and a deep baritone answered in a friendly tone. Greetings. I am Master Sean, and these are my companions, Master Skiff and Awakened Arden. We were on our way back to Ravenheart. Are you headed that way as well? Rain frowned. Master Sean, Master Skiff. She had not heard of these Ascended before. Granted, there were thousands of Ascended in the world, but still. Each of the Song Domain's masters was like a minor celebrity, especially those in Ravenheart. There was something else that seemed strange about these people too. She was standing there, frozen, with her eyes closed, but they did not seem to care enough to react in any way. Wouldn't it be natural to ask what she was doing? Her teacher lingered for a few moments. Yeah, we were on our way back to Ravenheart too. Then there was a long stretch of silence. Eventually, Master Sean asked, his voice sending a chill running down Rain's spine for some reason. You look a little familiar, young man. Say, have we met before? The tone of his voice was perfectly friendly, and so were his words. But she suddenly felt suffocated, as if there was something eerily, maddeningly wrong with it all. Her teacher's answer was a little somber. As a matter of fact, we have indeed met before, although I doubt that you'll remember. In any case, why don't you and your friends continue onward? Let's part on friendly terms and go our separate ways. How about it? There was another lengthy silence. Shivering, Rain heard a strange rustle come from the direction of the three strangers. Their surroundings were slowly turning colder. What was that rustle? How about it? How about it? Master Sean's voice still sounded human, but his speech had turned strangely incoherent. Another voice joined, its mannerisms and intonations too similar to the first. We are on our way back to Ravenheart. These are my companions, Master. We are on our way. How about it? Rain was still stuck on her previous thought, unable to throw it out of her head. What was that rustle? She had never heard a sound like that before. Just at that moment, the disturbing rustle grew louder, and a third voice added amicably. These are my companions. My companions. My companions. That rustle. How about you become my companions too? Her teacher took a deep breath. Rain could hear his voice turning dangerously cold. Listen here, bastard. She had never heard such coldness in his voice before, and the unfamiliarity scared her. You might have managed to claw your way out of Dread's tomb, but so did I. You might have survived in the depths of 1,000 hells, but so did I. So save me the theatrics and be on your way. Otherwise, I'll stop being gracious and skin you alive." Rain shuddered. Skin him." Suddenly, a thought flashed in her mind. The Skinwalker. The great abomination that had been the nightmare of humanity for the past 4 years. A great abomination. 3 of the indescribable horror's vessels, no less. Her terror was so vast that she couldn't even move. All Rain could do was keep her eyes closed and tremble. "I'm dead, I'm so dead." No, death would be a mercy. At that moment, Master Sean, Skinwalker's vessel, spoke with a hint of curiosity in his voice. "You, whose companion are you?" Her teacher scoffed. And then the world quaked. The world quaked, and then Rain was suddenly enveloped by absolute darkness. It was as if an impenetrable wall rose to surround her from all sides. The deafening cacophony of terrible sounds coming from the outside was muffled and dampened by that wall, and nothing but slight tremors reached her. For the moment, at least, she was safe. But those sounds... Feeling a cold dread grasp her heart, she took a shaky breath and tried to comprehend them. There was the sound of trees snapping. There were the screams of the air being torn. There was the roar of the ground being upturned. These were the sounds that she could recognize. But there were other sounds as well. Inhuman howls, chilling groans that sounded like the world itself was weeping. Eerie and revoltingly organic rustling, as if a mountain of flesh was ripping as it expanded while consuming itself. And many more that Rain simply could not describe and was afraid to fathom. The ground was shaking violently, and she was struggling to stay standing. Her fingers turned white on the hilt of her sword. "Teacher, be safe, please." But how could anyone stay safe when facing the Skinwalker? Countless people had fallen to its menace and were consumed, becoming vessels of the abomination's corruption. Mundane humans awakened, masters, even saints. Not even the sovereigns could eradicate this living curse. Shrouded by darkness, Rain realized how painfully weak and helpless she was. Just a few moments ago, she had been full of pride, praising herself for slaying an awakened demon. But now she remembered that in the world of the nightmare spell, she was nothing but an ant. An ant who couldn't even do anything when her teacher was fighting to protect her. Strong, I want to be strong. She had not changed at all. She was still the same girl who had been powerless to protect herself, let alone anyone else, when the tide of nightmare creatures descended on her school. The world continued to scream and quake for several minutes. Then an eerie silence suddenly enveloped it. The tremors stopped, and the terrible sound ceased. Rain remained motionless, keeping her eyes closed. She didn't dare to think about how the battle had ended. The thought of imagining her teacher not being there anymore, was too appalling. More appalling than what would happen to her if he was truly gone. Suddenly, the wall surrounding her disappeared. She knew that it had because light suddenly shone through her eyelids and cold wind scraped against her face. The air was permeated by the smell of wet wood and soil. "Please." A moment later, a familiar voice spoke from somewhere near. "Brat, you can open your eyes now." The relief Rain felt at that moment was strong enough to make her sway. She slowly opened her eyes and looked around, then froze in shock. In no way. The frozen forest was gone. It was obliterated entirely, and everywhere she looked, nothing but a barren expanse of flattened and upturned land could be seen. The trees had been reduced to mere splinters, and the ground itself was broken, with dark fissures covering it like bottomless scars. Here and there, the splinters were wet with blood. Buried under them, broken corpses of the unfortunate nightmare creatures who had populated the forest lay, their macabre sight mercifully hidden by the debris. That scene of devastation stretched as far as the eye could see. The entire landscape had been drastically changed in a matter of minutes, redrawn by the fury of the harrowing battle. The scale of the dreadful destruction was simply unfathomable. Rain took a trembling breath and finally looked at her teacher. He was standing a few steps away, as nonchalant as ever. His hair was ruffled, and there was a smudge of something dark on his cheek, but other than that, he was the same pale, roguish scoundrel she knew. Of course, Rain struggled to perceive him in the same light. She had known that her teacher was a powerful being, of course, but this was the first time she really witnessed his power. Where were the vessels of the Skinwalker? Rain tried to compose herself. The Skinwalker. Her teacher remained silent for a few moments, then silently took a step back. Behind him, 3 human corpses were piled on top of each other, each missing the head and with a deep wound where their hearts should have been. 3 vessels of a great nightmare creature. Rain swallowed. Her teacher had just killed 3 great abominations, just like that. There was something else. Did she imagine it, or were there tiny shards of a broken mirror glistening on the ground in front of the corpses? What how? Trying to comprehend the situation was too disturbing. So, Rain would rather think about its consequences. Her teacher had revealed himself, and although they were far away from Ravenheart, such a drastic change of landscape would not escape notice. Which meant that they had to get out of here as soon as possible. Receiving the reward for the huntsman was also not an option now. Rain would have to keep the fact that she was anywhere near this place a secret. It was a good thing that she had not shared her plans to hunt the demon with anyone. No one could know that a being who could slay 3 vessels of the Skinwalker lived in her shadow. She would have to return to Ravenheart and lay low for a few months. Luckily, that was what she had wanted to do anyway. Her teacher sighed. I know what you are thinking about, but Rain, sadly, you are wrong. She tilted her head a little. What? Why? Because you defeated the Skinwalker. He lingered for a moment, then shook his head and pointed to the 3 corpses. No, drawing attention to myself is not a good thing, sure, but actually we have a bigger problem. This guy, Master Sean, I recognize him. He was an ascended from the House of Night. Rain failed to understand what he was trying to say. And so, her teacher sighed and rubbed his temples in frustration. Right, you don't know. Well, let's just say that members of the House of Night should not be anywhere near the territory of Queen Song right now, and they must have been fairly close to Ravenheart, moving in secret when the Skinwalker got them. So, I am afraid that you and I have seen something that we were not supposed to see. She hesitated for a few moments, remembering everything that her father had mentioned about the House of Night and its relationship with the Song domain. Was there some problem between the two? It didn't seem that way. If anything, the Song domain seemed to be moving toward having a problem with the Sword domain, while trying hard to maintain a friendly relationship with the weaker House of Night. All of it was very mysterious. But at the same time, Rain understood the underlying meaning of what her teacher had said. Something that we were not supposed to see. Got it. Promising that I won't tell anyone is not going to work, I guess. So, just how big of a secret is it? Her teacher's face was a little somber. Big enough for Clan Song to erase any witness from existence. Well, not any witness, but a mundane girl with no backing. They won't hesitate to silence you even for a split second. Rain felt a cold chill run down her spine. Damn the royal clan. Why would Clan Song pay attention to someone as small and insignificant as her? She gritted her teeth and looked at him stubbornly. I do have backing, though. My father works for the government. His rank is pretty high now, too. Surely, Clan Song won't want to spoil their relationship with the government because of something like that. Her teacher smiled wistfully. Ah, the naivete of youth. First of all, you are overestimating the significance of your father's position. Second of all, you are overestimating the significance of the government. And lastly, you are underestimating Clan Song, who says that anyone would be able to prove anything after they make you disappear. His smile turned colder. In fact, they won't even have to make you disappear. Technically, there's a guy among them who is much worse than the Skinwalker. He can destroy your soul and wear your body like a suit, coming to family dinners and gossiping about boys with your mother. No one will suspect a thing. Rain shuddered. Slowly, the magnitude of the trouble she had gotten herself into was starting to dawn on her. Crab, who had made her think all those stupid things earlier. Spend months in absolute safety. Rest and relax while working on awakening at a leisurely pace. Be pampered at home. She had been such a fool. Rain cursed quietly, stared at the three corpses for a while, and then asked her teacher in a hopeful tone. So what do we do? Her teacher was, whatever it was that he had to have a solution without a doubt. Suddenly, she felt a lot calmer. Her teacher remained silent for a while, then smiled. What to do, indeed? Well, I am sorry to tell you this, Rain, but you can't show your face in Ravenheart for a while. You'll have to disappear before they can make you disappear. We need to go somewhere where they won't be able to find you quickly and spend some time there. She closed her eyes and asked, her tone turning a little grim. Where can I even go? Even if I can survive a solo journey to another citadel, there is no city in the Song domain where the royal clan doesn't have eyes. Crossing into the Sword domain is not an option, not that I would want to leave my family behind. I can't return to the waking world without the help of a saint, and even if I could, locating me there would be even easier. Her teacher scratched the back of his head with a thoughtful expression. He lingered for a while, then glanced at her with a strange expression. What about one of those road crews? They are safe enough for you to survive, with more than enough mundane humans for one more to not draw attention, and best of all, far removed from all citadels. They're lacking manpower too, so no one would ask any questions. If I were you, I'd get myself hired as a laborer there and hide in the crowd. A sly smile appeared on his face. Her teacher remained silent for a moment, then added with a chuckle. In fact, wasn't there a huge crew being assembled to construct a road east? You know, to Godgrave. Why don't you join that one? Rain sighed. Why not indeed, Momiji? Effie patted little Ling on the head and smiled. What do you want, Dumpling? She was sitting in a comfy wooden chair, staring at the wooden ceiling absent-mindedly. The little boy cuddled comfortably on her lap, hugging her like a little monkey. He looked up at her with his bright eyes and grinned sheepishly. Story. Effie laughed. Story, which story? Little Ling was suddenly very thoughtful. He remained silent for a while, a comically concentrated expression on his face, and then beamed. Mommy defeating the giant. She hugged him and shifted slightly, then said in a deep voice. All right. Listen then. A long time ago in a faraway land, 6 evil saints imprisoned Hope in a tall tower. Hope was very lonely in the tower and cried bitterly. So your mom and her friends decided to defeat the evil saints and rescue her. The image of the damp stone cell under the Chalice Temple flashed in her memory. The smell of blood, the whimpers of the other girls, the war maidens, driven to madness by the demon of desire, were slowly training to death. The graveyard of swords surrounding the ancient temple. She chased the ghastly memory away and smiled warmly. Noctis, the wicked warlock of the East, Uncle Kai, who was a brave warrior from the Ivory City back then, Auntie Cassie, who was a wise priestess of the Night Temple, and of course your mom, who was a little girl. These were the 4 heroes who ventured to rescue Hope. Oh, and there was someone else as well. A nameless shadow who had escaped its master and became friends with Noctis. Effie only had a vague recollection of the shadow devil who had followed Noctis, but it seemed rude not to mention him. Her adorable son giggled. "Huh, what's so funny?" Ling Ling giggled again. "Mommy is not little. How can Mommy be little?" She smiled. "I was a little kid once too, you know. Actually, I was a little kid twice. In any case, after we, the four heroes, met each other and swore to save Hope, the evil saints learned about it and sent a messenger to scare us. It was a huge giant, as tall as a mountain with a body made of polished steel, but your mom and her friends weren't afraid at all. That was because the kind priestesses of the goddess of life had taught me the secret art of slaying evil giants. You see." Effie continued to tell the fairy tale version of her second nightmare, just as she had done 100 times before. For some reason, this story was one of Ling Ling's favorites, maybe because the very idea of his mom being a little girl excited him endlessly. She had no idea why, but looking back, it had indeed been a bit exciting. Effie had spent her actual childhood either in a hospital bed or in a wheelchair, so getting a little taste of what it meant to be a healthy kid was special, even if it was in the depths of a ghastly nightmare. Of course, she had removed all the distasteful parts from the story, replacing them with fantastical and exaggerated adventures. Flying ships, eccentric sorcerers, fire-breathing dragons, and a happy ending. The sugar-coated version of the Nightmare of Hope had everything one needed for a great fairy tale. And so, Cassie dropped the flying ship right on the evil giant's head. Boom, crash, bang. The ship shattered into 1,000 pieces and the giant fell down, making the ground shake. Auntie was perfectly fine, of course. She had jumped away just in the nick of time and glided down with the help of her magical rapier. A huge shadow was still. Just then the door opened, and a handsome young man walked into the room. Way too handsome, even. Effie smiled at her husband and exhaled slowly, trying to maintain a relaxed expression. "Daddy." Little Ling jumped off her lap and ran to hug his dad. Luckily, this time, he remembered to control his strength. Picking the boy up, Ling's dad smiled at him and then glanced at Effie. He was hiding it well, but she could see that the smile did not reach his eyes. "It's time." Her husband nodded, and then looked at the little boy in his arms. "Hey, Wolfie, how about you and Dad go on a little adventure?" Little Ling seemed to be torn. But Mommy didn't finish the story. His dad laughed. "The evil giant story, I'll finish it for her. Or how about it? Dad has an evil giant story too. There are really too many evil giants in the world now that I think about it. This one was named Goliath and only had one eye." Effie sighed, then rose from her chair and stretched slowly. Then she followed her husband out of the room. They were currently in their spacious, sunlit cottage. It had been built from natural wood by none other than him and had a simple, cozy charm to it. The cottage was the centerpiece of the entire farm, which was a rather idyllic place. A beautiful view of the emerald meadow opened from the front porch. Of course, the meadow had transformed in the last 4 years. There were fields, vegetable gardens, barns, and livestock corrals. There were also a few other buildings, some of them hidden in the forest. Most of these buildings were built of wood, but some included more advanced materials. The latter extended underground and served a different purpose. These buildings included barracks, armories, and all the other essentials of a military base. That was because the Beast Farm often moonlighted as a dimensional carrier for the Wolf Army. "Boss. Boss is here. Attention." A scattering of soldiers stood at attention. Most were hidden from sight, but some had gone out to stretch their legs. Little Ling waved at them excitedly, causing a wave of smiles. "Uncles are funny." Effie nodded at the nearest soldier and said in a quiet tone, "Assemble the troops. ETA is 1 hour, so be ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. We are going to spearhead the breaching maneuver by the Western Quadrant Defense Forces. The mission is just as the briefing said, push the abominations back and establish a fire line. Funnel the civilians, if there are any left, into the designated safe zone. The soldier, a rowdy-looking man who had been under her command from the first days of the deployment to Antarctica, nodded with a roguish smile. "What about the big bastards, boss?" Effie inhaled slowly. "Don't worry about them. The government is sending the entire cavalry this time. We'll take care of the gate guardians. And also—" She frowned and glared at him. "Watch your language in front of Ling Ling, you reprobate. Aren't you already a master? Why are you still so brainless?" The man blinked a couple of times, then gave her a terribly guilty look. "Oh, sorry, boss, I forgot." He didn't seem too sincere, though, no doubt itching to accuse her of hypocrisy and double standards. Effie shook her head and pushed him away. "Go get ready." With that, she turned to her husband and son, putting on a bright smile. "Shall we go?" She took her husband's hand, and a moment later, the three of them disappeared from the meadow. Instead, they appeared in a room with alloy walls, situated in the depths of a government fortress. The furnishings were sparse, but there was a large screen displaying the arid landscape of the Western Quadrant on one of the walls. Little Ling looked at the sand dunes with interest. "Daddy, what is that?" His dad smiled. "This is a desert, Wolfie. We are in the Western Quadrant. Aren't you a lucky kid to get to travel all around the world and see all kinds of places?" The boy was thoughtful for a moment. "Daddy, aren't you a little silly? It's a picture. Little Ling has seen a lot of pictures already." Effie's husband laughed. "I guess you are right." He glanced at Effie and nodded. She remained silent for a bit, then patted little Ling on the shoulder and said in her usual carefree tone, "Dumpling, Mom has to go to work now. Be a good boy and listen to Dad, okay?" He grinned and waved at her absent-mindedly. "Bye, Mommy, have fun at work." A second later, little Ling was already asking his dad about deserts and sand. The handsome young man exchanged a poignant look with her, silently mouthed 3 words, and then took their son out of the room. Outside, a high-ranking government envoy was already waiting for them. Left alone, Effie took a deep breath and said quietly, "I love you too." Then the smile slowly disappeared from her face, replaced by a grim expression. She remained motionless for a while, then nodded and summoned her armor. Soon, her athletic figure was covered by a skin-tight layer of polished metal, as if she had been dipped in liquid steel. She also summoned the Starlight Shard, shaping it into 2 strips of white cloth. One was tied around her waist, the other covered her chest. Effie was ready for war. Well, as much as anyone could be ready for war, which, in her experience, was not much at all. Picking up the black beast locket, she hung it around her neck and walked to the door. In the corridor outside, 2 figures were waiting for her. An annoyingly stunning man with auburn hair and green eyes, and a chillingly beautiful woman with pale skin and raven-black hair. Effie erased the grim expression from her face and smiled mischievously. "Hey there, handsome. Oh, and you too, Kai. Guys, you won't believe what I saw in Bastion. Princess found herself a boyfriend. At least I think that she found him. She might have just kidnapped the poor man to do unspeakable things to him. I know I—" She froze suddenly, looked behind her with a cautious expression, then relaxed visibly and added in a quieter tone, "I know I would if I wasn't such a prim and proper, virtuous married woman." Just a few minutes later, a majestic dragon with scales that resembled the midnight sky was flying over the endless sea of dunes, devouring distance with stunning speed. Effie and Jet were on his back, looking south with somber expressions. After a while, Effie sighed. "The situation has already changed." Jet nodded. "Yes, the city wall is breached. Western Quadrant Defense Forces are on approach, but the call is wreaking havoc with their tech. The awakened vanguard was attacked by one of the lesser gate guardians and managed to put it down, but their advance was stalled. So, we will arrive first. Soul Reaper maintained a neutral tone, but Effie could see that she was in a grim mood. It's not your fault. Don't beat yourself up too much. Jet glanced at her and smiled. My fault? Of course, it's not my fault. I am not someone who feels bothered by such things anyway. But despite her tough girl routine and carefully constructed facade of a cynical salary woman, she was bothered. Effie had gotten to know Soul Reaper Jet a bit during the Southern campaign, but they became really close during the Third Nightmare. And in the 4 years since, their friendship and comradeship had continued to blossom. Jet was a professional first and foremost. She wasn't really someone with a bleeding heart, the opposite, actually, but she took her responsibilities very seriously. As such, her cynical loyalty to the mission of preserving humanity was quite ironically much greater than the noble intent of most ardent idealists. She had already been doing her very best as a master, but now that Jet was a saint, one of the 5 saints serving the government, the scale and scope of her responsibilities were much greater. While Effie and Kai mostly dealt with military and diplomatic issues, simply executing the orders, Jet was much more knowledgeable and experienced. As such, she was involved in the administration and decision-making process of the government, influencing what orders all of them received. The government was in turmoil too. It was in flux, drifting on the currents of history. 4 years ago, the higher echelons of the government had made a decision to throw vast resources into rapidly developing its presence in the dream realm, where the future was. That was why Effie was almost permanently stationed in Bastion, while Kai spent most of his time in Ravenheart. Jet, however, had been against that strategy. She had insisted on keeping the government saints in the waking world, spread across the 3 remaining quadrants, to lessen the inevitable losses as much as possible, even at the cost of the future inferiority of the government's position in the brave new world of domains and sovereigns. It was not that she disagreed with the notion that the future of humanity lay in the dream realm. It was just that she advocated for a different allocation of resources. Sadly, she had failed to turn her opinion into policy. If she had, the current disaster could have been avoided, or at least lessened. Effie sighed. You're angry. I can smell that you're angry. Well, guess what? There's nothing better for treating anger than a good slaughter, and we'll be drowning in abominations in a few minutes, so there's no day like today. Jet chuckled. You are right, sure, but also let's not use the word slaughter, okay? Makes me queasy. At that moment, Kai's pleasant voice resounded in their heads. Ladies, if you feel queasy and are going to be sick, please wait until I land at least. Really, don't go around despoiling my scales. I have an image to uphold. Effie grinned. Oh, what about your image? Who are you trying to impress, Queen Song's daughters? The dragon didn't respond to her provocation. Instead, he lingered for a while and then asked, How is Aiko doing? Effie sighed. Come ask her yourself. She's still pretending to be angry. Oh, but she's doing fine, by the way. Her new boss is kind, handsome, and treats her very well. Kai answered nonchalantly. I'm glad, as long as she's doing well. A few seconds later, he asked in the same neutral tone. Just out of curiosity, how handsome are we talking? What about his style? Who makes his clothes? Effie grinned and chose not to answer. In front of them, the sea of dunes slowly turned into a desolate plain, with a vast, dried riverbed cutting it like an endless scar. Far away, on the opposite side of the immense chasm, a large city stood where the river's shore had once been, shrouded in haze. Their banter abruptly stopped. The city was burning, with towering plumes of black smoke rising into the piercing blue sky. Even from that distance, Effie could see the signs of cataclysmic devastation. The toll of human lives must have been terrible. Kai, with his incredible sight, could see much more. He didn't say anything, but his silence suddenly seemed sorrowful and forlorn. Effie gritted her teeth and looked away. "Do you see it, Kai? Was the last transmission accurate?" The dragon folded his wings and rushed toward the ground. His voice was even. "Yes, 7 gates. 6 of them Category 3, 1 Category 4. The gate guardian of the latter seems to be a great devil." He paused for a moment, then added, "The city is overwhelmed. A horde of abominations is rampaging on the streets. The local garrison seems to have fallen." Jet closed her eyes for a moment. "It's good, then?" Kai asked quietly, the emotions in his voice suppressed. "Good." She nodded. "Yes, if the abominations are rampaging, it means that there's still someone alive." A moment later, the dragon landed on the ground, raising a cloud of dust. Jet and Effie jumped off his back and approached the edge of the dry riverbed slope. Out there below them, the hastily assembled army of the Western Quadrant was assembling into a formation to assault the fallen city. In front of the mundane soldiers, the battered awakened vanguard was finishing off a wave of nightmare creatures that had wandered away from the burning ruins. They had noticed the flamboyant landing of the great dragon and were now looking back, cheering and waving their hands in the air. Kai's fame preceded him. Effie cracked her knuckles and asked, her voice uncharacteristically somber, "A great devil, can we even handle something like that?" All 3 of them had become immensely powerful after transcending. The battles they had won were beyond count, and the nightmare creatures they had killed were beyond measure. And yet, they had never faced a horror like that before. Only the sovereigns had. Facing a great devil was a first for them, and could very well become the last. A relaxed smile appeared on Jet's face. "What's the matter? If push comes to shove, we'll just die." "Well, the 2 of you will die. I'm already dead." Above them, the dragon scoffed. His magnificent voice resounded above the desert, making Effie's heart tingle. That was just something Kai's draconic voice did, even if he did not use his aspect abilities. "Still, we should try to stay alive." "Well, Effie and I should. You just stay in one piece, Lady Jet." She chuckled. "All right. As we've discussed before, Kai will support the Western Quadrant forces in their advance. Effie and I will spearhead the assault, push back the abominations, and engage the Gate Guardian. There's nothing else to say. Godspeed." The beautiful dragon nodded its great head, then pushed himself off the ground and glided gracefully toward the assembled army. Jet looked at Effie, already summoning her scythe. She lingered for a moment, and then said in a tone that was a little gentler than usual, "But seriously, don't die, Effie. Nightingale and I can die, but you can't. You know why? There are people waiting for you to return." For a moment, Effie felt her heart tremble, just like it did every time she went into battle. It had been easy to risk her life before when she was young, but now she had things to protect, and people whom she did not want to and could not allow herself to leave. Every time death snarled in her face, Effie felt guilt and shame. And fear. What was she doing on the battlefield when her husband and son were somewhere else, waiting for her? Why was she being so stupid when she could have remained safe behind a citadel wall, in their idyllic cottage, allowing someone else to fight and bleed and die in her place? But then she remembered. It was precisely because of little Ling and his dad that she was here. Because someone had to prevent the world from collapsing on their heads and burying them under the rubble. Effie didn't particularly trust someone else to not mess everything up, so she had to build a world where her son could live a decent life with her own 2 hands. Thankfully, her hands were quite strong. If you wanted to do something right, you had to do it yourself. Looking at Jet, Effie grinned. "Why do you always talk about dying, big sister? Not everyone is like you. I'm not planning on kicking the bucket anytime soon. That would be such a tragedy. Imagine all the food I would not be able to eat." Laughing lightly, she shook her head and activated her transformation ability. A moment later, a titanic figure clad in polished steel rose from the dust, shining brilliantly under the incandescent sun. Effie rose to her full height, towering 100 meters above the desert. She was like a colossus cast of lustrous steel, the gorgeous lines of her athletic body shining under the blinding sun, a beautiful war deity rising to face the tide of monstrous abominations. The white fabric of the starlight shard rippled in the wind. Expanding the two memories to fit her giant size cost a significant amount of essence, but it was worth it. Sadly, the same could not be said about the rest of her arsenal. Not that there were a lot of memories in her possession that could accommodate her transformation. Even those that could were too weak to justify the expenditure. Especially because Effie had other ways to spend her essence. As soon as her transformation was complete, she activated her ascended ability. Instantly, every soldier at the bottom of the dry riverbed, those that could see her at least, felt their hearts beating faster. Their spirit and body were reinvigorated, while their strength, speed, agility, endurance, and resilience were greatly enhanced. But that was the good thing about Effie's transformation. It was hard not to notice a 100-meter-tall colossus, especially one as striking as her. Her ascended and transcendent abilities synergized beautifully to make sure that anyone on the battlefield could see her at any moment, even in the midst of a furious melee. As long as she was on the front line. The loud, reverberating roar rose from the riverbed as thousands of soldiers, both mundane and awakened, chanted in exhilaration. "Raised by wolves. Saint Athena. War beast is here." Their impassioned voices were full of resolve and grim determination. And as they looked at her, Effie felt her essence being slowly replenished. Well, at least someone is in a good mood. Looking past the exultant soldiers, she gazed at the burning city. From her current height, Effie could see the eerie fissures of the nightmare gates surrounding it like 7 ghastly siege towers. One of them was especially tall, reaching even higher into the sky than she did. There were several gargantuan figures moving in the sea of nightmare creatures. The great devil was not the only calamity unleashed by the 7 gates. There were other gate guardians as well. 2 of them were even titans. A great devil, a corrupted tyrant, 2 fallen titans, and a swarm of terrors. One way or another, today's battle was going to end up in the history books. It was not quite the chain of nightmares, but definitely the worst crisis the waking world had faced since the Southern Campaign, by far. What would the history books tell? That on that day, the forces of humanity triumphed valiantly over a dreadful enemy. Or that on that day, humanity mourned the loss of many of its most brilliant warriors. Even now, on the precipice of the battle, Effie could not tell. To hell with that. She grinned and kneeled, then placed the back of her hand on the ground, the open palm facing the sky. Who cares about history? This battle might seem dreadful, but it was destined to become an insignificant speck in the tapestry of horrors that awaited humanity in the coming decades. In the near future, there would be 100, 1,000 battles much more terrible than this. By the end of it all, there might be no one left to read history books, let alone write them. Such exciting times, she was definitely not going to miss them. "Cassie, are you watching?" There was a moment of silence, and then a response came, as calm and relaxed as ever. "I am." Effie smiled. "Watch well." It was Cassie's job, after all, to witness and remember everything. Down below on the ground, the tiny ant that was jet soared into the air and landed gracefully on her palm. Effie rose to her feet, gazed ahead, and took the first step forward. The ground quaked under her titanic footsteps. She leaned forward and pushed off, breaking into a sprint. The sight of the beautiful steel colossus running was both magnificent and terrifying, the sheer scale of it all escaping imagination. Awash in the echoing war chant of the advancing army, Effie leaped over the vast battle formation, the marching mundane soldiers, the wings of lumbering MWPs, the heavily armored tanks, the awakened phalanx, and crossed the dry riverbed in no more than a dozen great strides, making the world quake. Then she was among the nightmare creatures. Standing on her palm like a beautiful toy soldier, Jet shouted, "Don't slow down. Proceed to the designated drop point." Effie answered with a scoff. "When have I ever slowed down?" Her voice was like the thunderous song of a divine war horn. And that was with her keeping it down. Jet was tough enough to withstand the full volume of Effie's voice, but if a mundane human happened to be too close, they would easily be crippled or outright die under its pressure. So, she had developed a habit of staying silent or speaking softly when assuming the godlike form of the militant giantess. A moment later, her foot descended on a swarm of nightmare creatures, ruthlessly crushing dozens of them in one fell swoop. Some had survived, and were already trying to crawl up her shins, their fangs and claws scraping fruitlessly against the polished steel. Her armor was a supreme memory of the first tier, though, so none of their attempts amounted to anything. Even if the armor was breached, Effie had her awakened ability to fall back on. As great as her offensive might was, her defenses were even more astonishing. In fact, Effie was often tempted to say that she was practically indestructible. Of course, she never did. Saying something like that was just inviting trouble. There were all kinds of nightmare creatures out there. Many of them had means of bypassing physical defense, or could deal entirely different types of damage. The moment a powerful awakened became arrogant was usually the moment they died. The spell whispered into her ear, "You have slain. You have slain. You have slain." Ignoring the sonorous choir of its voice, Effie leaned forward a little and delivered a powerful kick, pulverizing an especially large abomination. The creature must have been at least a dozen meters tall, and would have looked like a towering behemoth to the advancing soldiers. But to her, it was no bigger than a large rat. Its body disintegrated into a disgusting torrent of bloody liquid, and before that liquid splattered across a vast stretch of the riverbed slope, Effie was already past the foremost wave of the nightmare creatures. Nothing but devastation was left in her wake. "You have slain a corrupted monster," Mauve Kanak hit. A moment later, she reached the city barrier. It was quite inferior to the great walls surrounding NQSC. Not all human cities were siege capitals. After all, the true siege capitals had been constructed and received that title during the dark times, and there were just a few of them left standing in the world. Of course, all human cities had been turned into highly advanced strongholds after the descent of the spell, both to keep the nightmare creatures out and to make them habitable in the aftermath of the previous era. Still, the scale of their defenses varied. The ruined city in front of Effie had quite a robust wall once upon a time, but now it lay in ruins. The streets were obscured by smoke, and countless abominations were rampaging under its suffocating shroud. From this close, she could hear a terrible cacophony of crumbling buildings, bestial roars, sporadic gunfire, and human screams. There were indeed survivors there below her, which was why she had to be careful. "To your left." Jet's shout was very timely. Turning her head, Effie saw a wide highway piercing into the heart of the city. There was a fortified railway in its middle, with a mess of overturned train cars laying on the tracks. The highway itself was crowded by military vehicles, all empty and painted red by blood. This was where the city garrison forces had tried, and failed, to stop the tide of abominations after the walls fell. What was important to Effie, though, was that she would be able to use the highway to reach the heart of the city, without trampling countless civilians to death and toppling damaged buildings. Paving a bloody path through the horde of abominations, she stomped her way to the highway. Countless abominations perished under her footsteps. Those that were more powerful were crushed to death in her grasp, torn apart, or splattered across the concrete. Their assault was like a dark tide. Some were large enough to pose a threat to even someone as giant as her, but Effie did not only have size on her side. She also had her skill, intellect, and battle experience. The combination was truly devastating, and none of these meddling creatures could withstand her might. It would have been even more devastating if she had a proper spear and shield to wield, but alas, she did not. So, Effie fought with her bare hands, or rather, with her entire body except for one hand, which was being used to carry Jet, in accordance with the ancient hand-to-hand combat techniques hammered into her bones by the war maidens of the Chalice Temple. There were swarms of flying abominations as well. When those descended upon her, even Jet received an opportunity to bloody her blade. Reaching the highway, Effie advanced swiftly toward the heart of the city. As she ran, shattering the road and flattening overturned train cars and abandoned military vehicles with each step, she kept her eyes on the true threats. To her left, on the edges of the city, the colossal shape of the fallen Titan was toppling residential towers and feeding on the crushed corpses of countless humans. To her right, the massive figure of the corrupted tyrant was consuming the remains of the government compound. Another Titan was nearby, having already breached the ceiling of a deep underground shelter. And finally, far ahead on the opposite side of the city, past the shattered barrier, a vague silhouette of the great devil was towering above the local outskirts, moving slowly in the eerie silence. There were two more gate guardians spread throughout the ruins, as well, both already gazing at her and narrowing the distance, and a sea of nightmare creatures following them. Everyone wants in on the party. Finally, she reached the drop point. Effie sent a shockwave spreading from the spot where the edge of her foot had dug into the ground to stall her momentum, and came to an abrupt halt. In the next moment, her voice shook the sky with a thunderous, defiant call. "Wolf Army, charge!" The wolves had been a company during the Southern Campaign, consisting of around 100 awakened and 10 times as many mundane soldiers, as well as a platoon of MWPs and a robust stable of specialized vehicles. The majority of the mundane members of the Wolf Company were not frontline specialists, but instead support personnel meant to facilitate and enhance the combat effectiveness of the awakened. However, the company had swelled in the past few years, turning into a battalion consisting of 1,000 seasoned awakened warriors and around 5,000 mundane soldiers. It had also distinguished itself as one of the most elite combat units of the government forces, earning the official title of the Wolf Army. The Wolves were, first and foremost, shock troopers. They often fought in isolation from the rest of the government forces or led the attack, dropping directly into the fiercest locations on the battlefield from the Black Beast Locket. That was right. Effie not only had her own army, but also often carried it around. Their most common strategy was for her to assume the giantess form, cleave her way to a strategically important point, and deploy her legion in a flash of shocking violence. It was the same today. As Effie's roar stunned the nearest nightmare creatures, rows and rows of soldiers materialized on the rubble of the burning city, as if marching out from the depths of hell. A moment later, the awakened vanguard already unleashed a barrage of arrows, projectile weapons, and long-range aspect abilities. At the same time, heavy artillery vehicles launched concussive shells, and the lumbering MWPs came to life, the barrels of their armaments blooming with fire. The melee fighters had already closed down their ranks, forming a loose phalanx. The tide of nightmare creatures descended upon them in a demented frenzy, only to be broken, torn apart, and pushed back. "Show them hell." Effie's booming voice thundered from above. Invigorated by the sight of their commander, the wolves let out ferocious howls and redoubled their efforts to eviscerate the nightmare creatures. Cheeky bastards! She bent down and swiped her hand across the ruins of a building, grabbing a hulking abomination and using it as a projectile to crush dozens more into bloody paste. Effie observed the battlefield from high above. For the moment, at least, everything was going according to plan. The wolves had a simple but dire objective: to secure a stronghold in the ruined city that would serve as a bulwark against the horde of nightmare creatures. The 7 gates were positioned far away from the dry riverbed, so most of the abominations were amassed on the other side of the city center. The position where the wolves had deployed was on the outer edges of the center, above the largest underground civilian shelter, and close to the reserve control station responsible for the city's automated defense systems. They had to push the nightmare creatures back, establish an impregnable fire line, bring the defense systems back online, secure the perimeter, and help funnel the surviving civilians into the shelter. At the same time, the main force of the Western Quadrant Army would advance from the rear under Kai's leadership, cleanse the western part of the city from abominations, and join the Wolf Army, effectively drawing a clear battle line straight through the city center. That was the plan, at least. Of course, the entire plan depended on a single presumption: that the 3 saints would be able to slay, or at least hold back, the primary targets, the Gate Guardians. Because no matter how elite and experienced the wolves were, and no matter how numerous the Western Quadrant Army was, mortal soldiers like them were simply incapable of stopping titans, let alone facing great abominations in battle. Effie glanced at the towering figures of the 2 titans, both drawing closer. The corrupted tyrant seemed to be moving in the direction of the Western Quadrant Army, which had already engaged in a bloody battle on the streets of the city. That one was Kai's problem now. Sadly, it seemed that the reinforcements would be delayed. The true horror, though, was the Great Devil, which had abandoned the outskirts and crossed the ruined walls of the city, moving unhurriedly in the direction of the Wolf Army. The creature was still dozens of kilometers away, but its presence already felt suffocating. We can still win. In this battle, the government army had a secret weapon. That weapon was the seneschal of the great clan Valor, Saint Song of the Fallen. Information was the lifeblood of warfare, especially so when one was dealing with nightmare creatures, many of whom possessed great and terrible powers. Knowing your enemy was more often than not the difference between life and death. And with Cassie whispering into the ears of Effie, Kai, and Jet, they would know what the enemy was capable of once the abominations got within range of the dormant ability. Of course, no one except for the 3 of them could know that the blind seer serving the King of Swords was secretly assisting the government. It's good to have friends. As Effie thought that, Jet suddenly spoke in a calm, cold voice. I think the situation calls for the slingshot maneuver. Effie looked down, studying the tiny, beautiful woman standing on her palm. Soul Reaper's icy blue eyes were full of grim, murderous, and cold resolve. That one, are you sure? Jet nodded, then smiled faintly. Yes, I'll stall the Great Devil until you and Kai are done dealing with the other Gate Guardians. Don't play with your food and come help me as soon as you can. Effie hesitated for a moment, holding back the words of concern. Jet was right. Dealing with 2 titans was already outside the realm of possibility. If the Great Devil was allowed to enter the fray and join forces with them, everyone would be doomed. Eventually, she simply smiled. All right, just don't kill it before we arrive. Or, if you do and receive a weapon memory, give it to me. You already have your legacy relic while I'm sick of fighting abominations with my bare hands. Their guts get stuck between my fingers. It's disgusting. Jet grinned. Deal. Now, do it before I change my mind. Effie sighed, then shifted her body, slowly bringing the hand on which Jet stood back. She extended her colossal arm backward, keeping it level with her shoulder. The slingshot maneuver was not something the two of them had learned from books on military science. It was something they invented after participating in countless battles together. While calling it a maneuver was mostly a joke, they just liked how legitimate it sounded, which was a bit funny, considering the actual procedure. The procedure in question, meanwhile, was rather simple. Effie strained her muscles, exhaled, and slung her arm forward. Her hand rotated, the open palm facing the wind. Jet would have slid off and plummeted down if not for the fact that the pressure of acceleration pressed her into the vertical wall of polished steel. A mundane human would have been crushed by such pressure, but her transcendent body was immensely resilient. She endured, kneeling slowly and looking up. A small hurricane was raised by the passing of the colossal arm. Effie grunted and pushed her palm forward with all her might, launching Jet into the air like a supersonic missile. The Soul Reaper soared into the sky, flying in the direction of the distant Great Devil with terrible speed. As she did, her figure was suddenly surrounded by wisps of ghostly mist. Being carried around on the palm of a militant giantess was perhaps the world's most exciting amusement ride in the world, losing only to being tossed into the sky by said giantess, or maybe riding on the back of a dragon. Today, Jet had the opportunity to experience all three. Who would have thought that a neglected girl from the outskirts would one day be living such an exciting life? However, she wasn't really having fun. Nor was she living, if one wanted to be technical. Clad in a black leather armor, Jet soared across the sky. Her raven-black hair fluttered in the wind as her figure tore apart the towering pillars of smoke, the landscape of the ruined city streaking beneath her like a blur. Her icy blue eyes were burning with murderous intent. Perhaps it was for the best that she was moving much too fast to see the scenes of devastation clearly. The terrible loss of life was aggravating enough, but the irreparable damage done to the crucial infrastructure would frustrate her even more. At the end of the day, the two were one, and the same. Cities could not function without people, while people could not survive in this poisoned world without the protection of the cities. So the losses humanity had suffered today were doubly great. Even if they were to win the battle and slaughtered the nightmare creatures, rebuilding the city was out of the question. Not with the focus of humanity slowly shifting toward the dream realm, and not in the aftermath of Antarctica. After today, there would be one less human city on Earth. The survivors could be relocated to other population centers, and in time, the population would grow to replenish the lost lives, but the number of cities only dwindled. Too many of them had been swallowed by the chain of nightmares, and in the years that followed, 2 more fell to the Skinwalker. This city would be the third the government lost in the last 4 years. To Jet, losing a city felt like being robbed of her personal belongings. It was sad, humiliating, and deeply distasteful. She had made a commitment to work for the government a long time ago, and as such, any defeat that the mission of the government suffered was a personal slight. Those bastards. Jet wasn't really sure who she was referring to, the nightmare creatures, or the people who had pushed back against her desire to allocate more precious resources to the waking world. It was not like she did not understand the inevitable future. The waking world, their world, was not ending yet, but its trajectory was already clear. There were already more nightmare gates opening each year than ever before, and the median category of those gates was slowly climbing toward a complete disaster. Most importantly, the sovereigns were in the dream realm, not only because they chose to be there, but also because it was hard for them to enter the waking world, as if their very existence was denied by it. So, even if a new supreme was born in the future, they wouldn't be able to remain here continuously and protect the cradle of humanity. Therefore, a single Category 5 gate would spell doom to all who remained. Which wasn't that bad, actually. Jet wasn't a reactionary hellbent on remaining on Earth simply because that was where she had been born. In fact, she understood better than most that adaptability was humanity's greatest weapon. Why wouldn't they resettle into a new world if their own was dying? In fact, for every city that had been destroyed in the waking world, several were founded in the dream realm. The government would have to relocate their efforts there as well. It was just that, in her opinion, even the best of her colleagues were panicking. The trauma delivered by the chain of nightmare was too great, even if few people acknowledged it. And since they were panicking, they were rushing too much. So she was forced to clean up their messes. Because of the rush, the government forces were too late to prevent this city's destruction. How ironic. Sometimes she regretted that there wasn't anyone else among the people wielding power who had come from the outskirts. If there had been just one person who shared her mindset. But wasn't it a pipe dream for someone from the outskirts to survive the gauntlet of the nightmare spell? Even she could not claim to have truly survived it. Streaking across the sky like a deadly missile, Jet kept her gaze trained on the great devil and gritted her teeth. A split second later, she activated her transformation ability. Her flesh turned into a ghostly mist, and a few moments later, there was a spectral wraith in the sky above the dying city. The wraith form had many advantages in battle. But it was also quite handy if one had been tossed like a dart by an unreasonably strong giantess, since being a ghost could prevent them from turning into thin film splattered across several kilometers of ragged terrain upon landing. Not that Jet would. With her special physique, she could strike the ground like a meteor and climb out of the crater in one piece, if a little battered. Still, a soft landing was better. This time, sadly, the landing was not going to be particularly soft. She was dropping right on top of a great devil, after all. Effie's aim was immaculate. In the last few moments before plummeting to the ground, Jet snarled coldly and turned her scythe into a khopesh. By now, her legacy relic had reaped countless souls. The strongest of them had belonged to a great monster, and so it was equal to a supreme weapon of the second tier. Of those countless souls, 5 were currently bound by the relic, 1 for each of the 5 forms it could turn into. Jet could consume them to replenish her essence if her own reserves ran dry. Apart from that, each of the bound souls granted a mystical effect to the corresponding weapon, akin to an enchantment. The soul dwelling in the black khopesh had belonged to a corrupted terror once, and a dreadful one at that. The effect granted by its soul to the sickle sword was that anyone cut by it would fall into a debilitating lethargy, losing the motivation to fight, move, and eventually even breathe. Of course, powerful enemies could resist the insidious lethargy, somewhat, but would still be weakened a little with each strike. As such, the khopesh was the most suitable of the Mist Blade's forms when dealing with an overwhelmingly powerful enemy. And that was what Jet was dealing with now. A great devil. At that moment, a soft voice resounded in her ears. He is the great devil, Heart of Canaket, the remnant of a cursed king. His power is to command the souls of the dead. He also wields the power of curses and is a wraith himself. His body is made of sand and is all but immune to physical damage. Worst of all, his soul can't be destroyed until all the souls he commands are scattered, and they are legion. I am sorry, Jet, it's a bad match. Jet grinned. Thank you. How fitting. The great devil she was about to face was also of the undead tribe, a fellow wraith. His powers did not exactly counter her own, but rather rendered them futile. It was, indeed, a bad match. Or maybe the best, considering that few people except her had even a tiny chance of destroying him. In any case, her determination to slay the abominations only grew stronger. Because as much as the heart of Kanak was a bad match for her aspect, he was a perfect match for her legacy relic. Absorbing his soul would not only elevate its overall power by 2 tiers, but also grant one of the mist blades forms a powerful effect that had a good chance of having synergy with her aspect. Now then, all that remained was to actually kill this great devil, or at least survive long enough for Effie and Kai to arrive. Jet slowed down her descent and glided gracefully to the shattered ground. Her ghostly khopesh pointed forward. There in front of her, a towering figure was slowly walking through the burning ruins, surrounded by a haze of screaming souls. Press forward. They are flanking us. Second company, fall back. We need an ascendant here. Across the wide stretch of burning ruins, the Western Quadrant army was fighting against the disorganized horde of nightmare creatures. The tide of abominations continuously crashed into the phalanx of the awakened warriors, quenching the flames that burned all around them with their fetid blood. The mundane soldiers followed behind, supporting the awakened and sweating inside their powered armor suits. The heavy artillery had remained in the riverbed, waiting for precise targeting data. They didn't dare to fire after the initial salvos, afraid to implicate the civilians who might have still been alive somewhere out there, among the smoke-filled streets. However, the MWPs still pushed forward. The influence of the nightmare gates was messing with their electronics, but after the rich experience of dealing with it in Antarctica, the scientists of humanity had made leaps in shielding technology. So, the lumbering war machines could fully exert their overwhelming firepower, for now. It was a heroic sight, but usually, even such a large expedition force would have been ill-prepared to face the vast horde of nightmare creatures, especially in the hellish conditions of urban warfare. Nevertheless, today, the soldiers of the Western Quadrant were valiantly pushing into the depths of the city and eradicating the nightmare creatures at a startling pace. There were 2 reasons for that. One reason was the shining silhouette of Saint Athena, who towered above the burning city in the distance. The sight of her not only lifted the spirits of the soldiers, but also imbued their bodies with ferocious power. Awakened were affected more, but even the mundane fighters showcased inhuman strength, speed, and endurance. What would not have been possible on any other day was possible today. The other reason. Fall. A deep, thunderous, chilling voice rolled across the burning ruins, crashing into the horde of abominations like a tidal wave. Countless nightmare creatures staggered and toppled to the ground. Others pressed forward despite its domineering power. However, their movements were drowsy and weak, as if they were struggling against an overwhelming compulsion. That was the moment when the soldiers of the Western Quadrant army advanced, cutting into the mass of dazed nightmare creatures like a sharp knife. The human warriors were strengthened by the war beast, while their enemy was weakened by the Nightsinger. Together, the powers of the 2 saints reigned on the battlefield. Kai folded his wings and plummeted down. His great maw opened, and an eerie, melodious, otherworldly sound escaped from it, akin to a haunting song. That song made all the other sounds of the ruined city, the roaring of flames, the groans of crumbling buildings, the clangor of steel, the howls of monstrous creatures, the thunderous drums of the cannonade, dissolve into background noise. A moment later, the song crashed into a swarm of nightmare creatures led by a hulking behemoth, causing their bodies to explode into gruesome fountains of crimson liquid. It was as if they were torn apart by an invisible blast. A transcendent sonic attack was an insidious thing. Rushing along the stretched battle line with tremendous speed, Kai flew through the expanding cloud of crimson haze and wasted a split second to observe the ruins. His vision spread far and wide, piercing through soil, concrete, and alloy. There was nowhere it couldn't reach, and instantly the whole city was perceived by him. What he saw was gruesome and sickening. Countless human corpses, countless people dying as he watched, frightened civilians hiding in their homes or underground shelters, fear and sorrow written on their faces, ashes, flames, and loss on a scale that the human mind could not comprehend. And of course, the nightmare creatures. The wolf army was pushing abominations back in the heart of the city. Effie was moving to intercept the approaching titans. Jet had just reached the sinister figure of the great devil. And closest of all, the corrupted tyrant barreling in the direction of the Western Quadrant soldiers. I need to kill it quick. The wolves were holding up well, but that was temporary. If the reinforcements did not arrive on time, the casualties would start to mount. Worse still, Effie would have to fight against two titans alone, and Jet would have to face the great devil alone. The more time he wasted, the more people would die. Just at that moment, like a lifeline, Cassie's calming voice resounded in his mind, whispering the secrets of his enemy. Kai spread his wings and rushed forward. As he flew above the carnage, his song shattered the most threatening of the abominations advancing on the awakened phalanx, while his words made the rest stagger and lose strength. Despair. Fear. Kneel. His essence was evaporating like morning dew. There were countless winged nightmare creatures clamoring to rip into his flesh, as well. He tore them apart with his talons, shredded their flesh with his fangs, and broke their bones with his tail. Leaving the Western Quadrant army behind, Kai remained alone above a sea of abominations. A hail of attacks enveloped him, coming both from the ground and from the air. He shrugged them off, evaded some of the abominations, and killed others. And all that time, he could see scattered survivors looking at the sky all across the city. Some of them were numb and terrified, thinking that the midnight dragon was another dreadful abomination. Some seemed to recognize him, looking up with desperate hope. The expressions of the latter hurt him more, because he knew that, for many of them, maybe most of them, there would be no salvation. Because in this world, weakness was a sin, and they were sinners. Kai was no stranger to that sin either. True, the days when he considered himself weak and unworthy to be in the company of his friends were long gone. After years of leading soldiers and surviving the most terrible hells, Kai wasn't shameless enough to proclaim that he lacked strength. No. He was strong, but his strength was still lacking. If he was stronger, more people would survive, and his friends would return from the battle with fewer scars. Sadly, he was already close to the pinnacle of what a human could achieve. It was so strange. Who could have thought that someone like him, a gentle and shy kid overly interested in music and fashion, would end up this way? Still, there were ways to gain greater strength. Opening his maw, Kai spoke. Be stronger. This time he was speaking to himself. Be faster. His mighty, winged body was suddenly overcome by a surge of energy. Be sharper. A moment later, he sent a destructive sonic wave spreading outward in a wide cone. Countless nightmare creatures were swept away by the invisible power of his song. A vast cloud of dust and debris instantly flew into the sky, which was suddenly void of suffocating smoke. In the middle of the devastated cone, the corrupted tyrant staggered as the sound blast crashed into it. The dreadful abomination was not killed, of course, or even seriously wounded. But that was not what Kai had wanted. All he had wanted was to distract the enemy for a moment. Knowing that his commands would not have a strong and immediate effect on an enemy of that class and rank, he simply rushed to the ground and opened his maw. In the next second, his sharp fangs bit into the tyrant's neck. A wide street was shrouded in darkness, framed by the burning buildings and billowing smoke. The ground was littered with rubble and broken vehicles. Here and there, human bodies lay in the pools of blood, covered with dust. A woman with raven black hair and icy blue eyes was standing in the middle of the ruined road, holding a black sickle sword. In front of her, A towering figure was moving slowly across the rubble, each of its steps exerting an invisible pressure on the world. The creature was surrounded by a haze of swirling sand, with only a vague silhouette of a gaunt human visible behind its veil. 1,000 screaming souls shrouded the ancient devil like a mantle. Jet looked at him coldly. "I hear that you are called the Heart of Kanakhet. Nice to meet you. I am called Soul Reaper Jet." A dark smile appeared on her pale face. "This is my city, so prepare to die." The great devil halted, looking down at her through the veil of sand. The whirlwind of souls surrounding it parted, revealing 2 gaping pools of darkness. Ghostly flames ignited in their depths, piercing her with a gaze of indescribable malice and hunger. Then a rustle of a myriad of whispers rose like a tide, enveloping her in a cold embrace. Jet did not know the words of the ancient language the fiend spoke, but understood them regardless with the help of the spell. "Broken thing Bo submit surrender, succumb." She felt a powerful compulsion press her into the ground, as if 1,000 invisible hands were pulling her soul down. However, the weight of her shattered soul was too great for them to move it even by a millimeter. Jet's smile widened. She raised her sword and took a step forward. "In your dreams." A split second later, her ghostly figure dashed toward the devil. Jet possessed an unusual soul. Her core was like a vast sphere of shattered crystal, countless shards pressed messily together to form a jagged sun. Her radiant essence constantly leaked through the gaps between the shards, but in return, the more living beings she killed, the more her broken soul core grew. And Jet had slaughtered countless beings over the years, since that was the only way for her to survive. By now, her core was massive like a giant star, burning furiously in the cold darkness of her desolate soul. Not only that, but her dead flesh could absorb much more essence than that of someone who was truly alive, which granted her tremendous physical strength. Strangely enough, that physical might also translated to the dire power of her wraith form. Moving like a ghost, Jet appeared in front of the great devil and lashed out with her sword. All of it happened in an instant, too fast to be discerned by mundane eyes. Of course, the eyes of the great devil were not at all mundane. The figure hidden in the sand shifted, raising a hand to swat away her strike. At the same time, the sand rose like a giant palm, repeating its movements. However, the mist blade was not swept away. Instead, it passed through the sand and cut deeply into the ancient fiend's soul. A moment later, a building to their left exploded into a cloud of dust, obliterated by the giant hand of sand. And one of the myriads of souls subjugated by the Heart of Kanakhet dissolved into nothingness, receiving the cut on his behalf. The abomination sustained no damage at all. It was only affected a little by the lethargic power of the black Kopish, shrugging it off a split second later. 1,000 spears of sand shot from his towering figure, moving too fast to be dodged at such a close distance. They passed through Jet's ghostly figure without doing any damage as well. She jumped back, knowing that this advantage of hers would not last for too long. And indeed, the silhouette hiding inside the sand tilted its head slightly. Then, the sand settled back onto it, forming the shape of a gaunt giant. Instead, the haze of screaming souls flowed forward like a raging river, threatening to tear her own apart. Soul attack. Jet gritted her teeth. This was going to be unpleasant. She pushed off the ground, weaving between the falling pieces of the toppled building to evade the torrent of souls. In her perception, the jagged pieces of torn alloy and shattered concrete were floating down slowly, nearly static. The great devil's attack, however, was almost too fast to react. In the next several seconds, the burning street turned into a furious battlefield. 2 wraiths, one made of mist, the other of sand, clashed in eerie silence, no sound produced by their ghostly steps. Only the sand rustled as it brushed against the rubble. Despite the devastating power unleashed by them, not even a single particle of dust was disturbed by their battle. The pillars of smoke were not torn apart by the hurricane wind. The scorching flames were not extinguished. The ground did not quake, and the sky did not shatter. That was because Jet was intangible, and so were her attacks. The harrowing storm of phantoms pursuing her was similarly aimed at her soul. If their battle had been happening on the material plane, though, the entire district might have already been flattened, turning into a smoldering ruin like many other districts of the city already had. Damn it! Jet reeled back, pierced by excruciating pain. She had delivered a rain of blows to the ancient fiend, but what was the point? Her insidious power, which had served her splendidly across countless battlefields, was almost entirely useless against the vile power of the heart of Kanakhet. Instead of cutting his soul, she was simply destroying the phantoms he had consumed. And they were indeed legion. There must have been millions of people living in the outskirts, where the great devil had been wandering before her arrival, and very few had escaped his bloodlust. Even if less than 1% of the victims had joined the whirlpool of souls, Jet would have to land thousands of strikes to destroy them all. Each of the attacks she failed to evade, however, dealt direct damage to her own soul. It was vast and tenacious, true, but in this war of attrition, Jet was still doomed to lose. Why did this bastard have to wield power over souls? Jet dodged a rustling torrent of haze and slashed at it with her sword, obliterating another unfortunate specter. Sadly, these specters were not actual beings, but instead parts of the great devil. Therefore, destroying them did not replenish her essence. Essence exhaustion was one of Jet's fears, perhaps even her only true fear. For all other awakened, losing all of their essence simply meant enduring a period of powerlessness and not feeling well. But to her, it meant death, true death, the final and irreversible obliteration of her being. What was worse, Jet wasn't sure that she would be able to control herself when facing this slow and excruciating dissolution. The few times she had come close to exhausting all her essence, well, she didn't really want to remember them. She had done a few shameful things. Unsurprisingly, pushing her limits to battle a great devil consumed an ocean of soul essence. Jet wasn't panicked yet, because her reserves were many times deeper than those of most other saints. More than that, 5 powerful souls were bound to her mist blade. If push came to shove, she would consume them one after another, postponing the inevitable. Still, even if she miraculously won today, the sea of soul essence she had accumulated would be all but spent. Jet would have to collect it again, drop by drop. Such a chore. Killing had become a chore a long time ago for her. Sometimes, she dreamt of being free of her flaw and living a peaceful life somewhere where there was no need to ever spill the blood of living beings. Not that there was such a place anywhere in the two worlds for someone like her. Those dreams were rare and silly, though. Most of the time, Jet was quite content with her life. Not at the moment, though. She evaded another attack nimbly and delivered a ruthless strike to the abomination, then jumped back, phasing through a melting wall. The sand followed. Despite the harrowing might and vile powers of the great devil, she was still holding her own. She was still fighting, full of resolve to see the fiend die. Why wouldn't she kill him? She had killed countless bastards who thought that they were stronger than her and were stronger than her already. Strength didn't decide who lived and who died. Jet did. Come, follow me more, hurt me more, waste time on me more. If there was one blessing about this excruciating fight, it was that the curse of lethargy affecting the heart of Kanakhet was slowly accumulating. Its effects were not significant yet, and yet Jet could feel that the devil was struggling a little to maintain his unceasing assault. Ignoring the pain, Jet felt a dark grin twist her lips. She retreated, one step at a time. Perhaps she was not powerful enough, yet, to slay the heart of Kanakhet. But luckily, she wasn't alone. Just like the devil had a legion of souls to protect him, she had an army, too. She had Effie and Kai. So she just had to preoccupy the bastard until they arrived. Surrounded by smoke and flame, suffering the assault of a great devil, Jet smiled viciously and laughed. The wolves were pushing the abominations back. A team of specialists already gained access to the reserve control station of the city's automated defense systems, working on bringing them, those that had not been destroyed, at least online. Makeshift barricades were being constructed, and there was even a trickle of civilians being guided to the shelter already. Effie had assisted her soldiers as best she could. She had personally eliminated the most threatening abominations in the vicinity of the wolf army and made sure that her soldiers were not overwhelmed by the tide of abominations. But now, to make sure that they were not annihilated, she had to sortie into the city and face the enemy on her own. Fighting a titan was not a problem. Effie was plenty titanic herself. However, this time, there were two walking calamities approaching her soldiers. One was a towering giant not much smaller than she was, his body carved from obsidian stone. The giant had 6 hands, each holding an archaic weapon. His head had 4 bestial faces, one on each side, waterfalls of blood spilling from 4 terrible maws. The bastard had swallowed countless humans and was hungering for more. The other titan was grotesque and disgusting. It was vaguely insect-like in appearance, with a bulging, fleshy hump rising dozens of meters into the sky from its back. The chitinous body was almost invisible under that mountain of flesh, and there was a noxious miasma drifting around the revolting creature like a vile haze. What troubled Effie the most was that there were 2 of the gargantuan abominations. Even worse, they were approaching the wolf army from different directions. If she rushed to face one, the other would trample her soldiers, leaving none alive. Those wretched things. Usually, she would not have been miserly on the swear words, but ever since becoming a mother, Effie had been trying to clean up her speech. With varying degrees of success. Letting out a chilling growl, she threw a burning gaze at the obsidian giant, then turned away decisively and pushed her colossal body into an earth-shattering run. The crawling horror was closer, and so she had decided to deal with it first. She had decided to do something else, as well. It was a bold new strategic solution that would not lose to the glorious genius of her patented slingshot maneuver. Of course, Effie would have to try her damnedest to make sure the thing actually worked. Leaping over a sprawling park with one tremendous jump, she caused the ponds located on its premises to spill out of their shores with her thunderous landing, and barreled toward the titan. The creature was enormous, but the top of its bulging hump barely reached her abdomen. Its flesh also seemed strangely porous, of course. Effie already knew why. As she was closing in on the monstrosity, it crawled forward and straightened its segmented legs. At the same time, a strange ripple spread over the gargantuan hump of its back. Effie scowled and held her breath, which wasn't easy because of her flaw. Nevertheless, it was necessary. In the next moment, countless holes opened in the mountain of flesh, expelling long plumes of the noxious miasma. It shrouded the titan like a cloud, spreading outward to cover a vast stretch of the city. Effie's face darkened. There had still been survivors in that district. Not anymore. Curse you. But that was not all. Following the miasma, numerous black rods were expelled from the holes in the creature's fleshy body. As they shot into the sky, the rods spread translucent wings and unfolded segmented legs, turning into a vast swarm of monstrous dragonflies. They seemed like tiny vermin to Effie, but of course, each creature was at least a meter long, easily capable of ripping an adult man to shreds. The undulating wall of the dragonfly swarm swirled around the crawling titan, whose hump had deflated somewhat. Ah, damnation! Effie allowed her supreme armor to envelop her face, turning into a beautiful mask of polished steel that perfectly copied the contours of her face. A tall white plume fluttered in the wind like a river of silk threads. "Here we go." She extended both her hands to the sides, lingered for a moment, and then forcefully brought them together, making her palms collide. A thunderous clap resounded above the city, shaking the heavens. Her clap was so forceful that it produced an actual shockwave, causing several buildings inside the cloud of miasma to explode with dust and crumble. The cloud itself was torn apart and pushed away from the city by the hurricane wind. Even the monstrous dragonflies were dazed, a breach appearing in the defensive wall of abominations surrounding the Titan. Leaning down, Effie plunged into that breach and enveloped the crawling horror's gargantuan body with her arms. Its fleshy hump pressed tightly against her torso, smearing disgusting fluid all across the polished breastplate. Struggling against the desire to retch, she dug her fingers into the abomination's soft belly. Effie could feel the fetid liquid trying to corrode her armor. She could also feel the creature's sharp claws scratching against her shins and leaving deep grooves in the polished metal. It didn't matter. She could withstand the attacks of the Titan for a few seconds, especially before it regained its bearings and got serious about breaching her armor. If there are two hostile forces attacking from different directions, the strategic move would be. Gritting her teeth, Effie strained every muscle in her colossal body. She rarely had a chance to push against the limits of her strength, but today was one of those days. No, actually, she had never done something that crazy before, at least not after becoming a saint. Killing the Titan would take too long and compromise her soldiers. She felt confident that she could kill the crawling horror, but not that she would slay it fast enough to prevent the obsidian giant from reaching the position of the wolf army. So, arg! A muffled growl escaped from beneath her polished mask. It felt as though her muscles would burst and her spine would snap. But instead, her feet plunged into the ground. At the same time, the Titan's segmented legs rose above it. Growling, Effie pulled upward and lifted the gargantuan body of the crawling horror into the air. So heavy. She didn't stop at that, though. As her growl turned into a roar, she exhaled and tossed the titanic being into the air. A strategic move would be to move the hostile forces to the same location. Effie had not just tossed the revolting abomination away. She had thrown it directly at the second Titan, whose lumbering figure was towering above the ruins in the distance. Looking at the crawling horror fly, its comically tiny body finally revealed from under the giant fleshy hump, its segmented legs moving in what seemed like panic. She couldn't help but frown. How come all my strategic solutions always end up as me tossing someone at someone else, though? The sight of the massive Titan flying across the sky was so stunning that even the nightmare creatures on the ground stopped in confusion. The human soldiers, who had developed a habit of glancing at Effie's towering figure frequently, did not miss the bizarre and baffling sight either. Perhaps both the abominations and the humans had a similar thought. I am seeing things right. They weren't. The only creature who wasn't confused was the obsidian giant, because the crawling horror was flying directly at him. Even though the four-faced Titan was as tall as Effie, he would still be buried under the mountain of flesh if she managed to hit her target. And she had impeccable aim. The giant moved, bringing one of his 6 weapons up. Then it ruthlessly fell down. The stone mace struck the crawling horror in the air, damaging its body and slamming it into the ground. A lake of fetid blood flowed out of the wounds of the revolting abominations, drowning several streets. The obsidian giant had avoided being struck by the titanic projectile. However, no sooner than the crawling horror hit the ground, the visage of a beautiful steel colossus was revealed from behind its enormous body, barreling toward the two titans at terrifying speed. Her exquisite mask was emotionless and eerily calm. Behind it, though, Effie's lips were twisted into a bestial snarl, and her eyes burned with murderous fury. The crawling horror was not as tall as Effie and the obsidian giant, but it was still a titanic creature. Therefore, its vast body had obscured the giant's view for a few moments before being struck down. Effie used these moments to shorten the distance between her and the enemy, unseen. By the time the enormous abomination smashed into the ground, the obsidian giant barely had any time to react. All he could see was a steel colossus rushing at him with great speed, her body the picture of physical excellence and perfect athletic form. The white plume of her helmet fluttered behind her like a foaming stream. The earth quaked with each of her graceful but thunderous strides. Effie did not waste any time to attack. She was unarmed, but that did not mean that she was powerless. Leaping over the scrambling, crawling horror, she planted her feet into the ground and grabbed the hand of the obsidian giant that had swatted the abomination down. Then, leaning back, she balanced on one foot and raised her other leg, bending it at the knee. A split second later, her foot shot forward like a demolishing siege ram and delivered a devastating sidekick to the chest of the six-armed titan. A deafening thunderclap rolled over the burning city, and an invisible shockwave tore apart the billowing smoke. The power of Effie's kick was so harrowing that a net of cracks appeared on the black obsidian of the titan's chest. The giant himself staggered back, his movements seeming slow because of his tremendous size. The obsidian giant would have been sent flying back and toppled to the ground, flattening dozens of buildings, if not for the fact that Effie was still gripping his hand. At the same time as the dreadful mass of the titan's colossal body pushed him back, she growled and twisted his arm, pulling it in the opposite direction. Effie used the rebound from her kicks to her advantage, adding it to her strength and channeling terrifying strain into the obsidian. There was a sound of cracking stone, and an ominous groan of something that should have been indestructible being torn. In the next moment, the elbow joint of the obsidian giant exploded into a rain of jagged shards. They rained down like meteors, causing clouds of dust to rise into the air. Effie wrenched the titan's arm, tearing it from the socket entirely, and then ripping it off. Finally free of her grasp, the six-armed abomination was tossed back. Of course, by then, he was a five-armed abomination already. Most importantly, crushing the fingers of the torn hand, Effie grasped one of the obsidian giant's weapons. A colossal black mace fell snugly into her grip, and a ferocious smile twisted her lips behind the mask. Now she wasn't unarmed anymore. Two titans. Her voice boomed above the ruins, making the sky tremble. Effie took a step forward. One is made of stone, the other is disgusting. Neither is edible. What's the point of your misbegotten existence? With that, she lunged into the forest of obsidian weapons. The giant had already recovered from her strike and launched a barrage of attacks, his 5 remaining arms moving like the spokes of a gargantuan wheel. By then, the crawling horror had already come to its senses. Despite the fact that the abomination had been wounded and removed from its potent defenses, the cloud of miasma and the swarm of monstrous dragonflies, it was still a dreadful creature. Its enormous body deflated, and then a tide of enormous tentacles shot from beneath it, aiming to wrap around Effie's legs. You! Caught by surprise, Effie swayed. She managed to block 3 of the giant's weapons with the black mace, but 2 more struck her on the shoulder, sending a powerful shock through her body and producing a river of sparks as they scraped against the polished steel of her armor. Crap! The powerful tentacles of the crawling horror were restricting her movements, enveloping both of her legs and one arm. At the same time, the obsidian giant was raining blows on her from above. She managed to protect her head, but her torso was being battered, the breastplate on the verge of bending inward. The supreme armor still held, but it had a limit too. Effie was a rank above the two vile creatures, but 6 classes below them. At the end of the day, though, what mattered the most was that she simply did not have enough limbs to contend with them both. "You bastards!" Growling, she tried to rip the tentacles apart with pure strength, but the spongy flesh was too slippery and elastic. She tried to break off another arm of the obsidian giant with a powerful strike of her mace, but to no avail. 3 of his weapons blocked her strike, while 2 more crashed into her helmet. All she achieved was becoming dazed. The situation seemed dire. What to do? Effie growled furiously and then dismissed her helmet, as if inviting the dreadful giant to smash her skull. And indeed, an obsidian sword instantly fell from above, aiming to slice it open. She looked up, placing her face in the path of the gargantuan blade, and caught it with her teeth. A dark joy ignited in Effie's eyes, and the corners of her mouth curled upward in a vicious grin. Then she tightened her jaw, shattering the obsidian blade. The dreadful giant was left holding only a hilt. He moved, planning to bring his 4 remaining weapons down upon her, but at that moment Effie looked at him, her teeth still bared in a grin. A split second later, her lips moved, and she spat a jagged shard of the gargantuan sword at his face. The fragment of the obsidian blade was shot through the air with the speed of a supersonic missile and plunged into the giant's eye, utterly destroying it. Even though the Titan had 7 more left, he still flinched back. That gave Effie all the time she needed. Stopping her struggle against the crawling horror, who had been trying to pull her down to the ground, she suddenly kneeled and bit into the largest tentacle, tearing it apart with her teeth. The revolting abomination let out a terrifying screech and reeled away, a river of fetid blood spilling from the severed tentacle. Effie spat the revolting flesh out, drowning a sea of flames below in a torrent of blood, and grimaced. "Arg, it tastes like SH, tastes like crap." Using the momentary weakness of the vile Titan, she used her trapped arm to grab another tentacle, pulled it to her mouth, and bit it apart as well. Both of her arms were free. The obsidian giant was already towering above, his 4 remaining weapons raised to crush her head. Effie lunged forward from her kneeling position. Her shoulder collided with the Titan's abdomen, and her arms whipped around to embrace him. Then, a bestial growl escaped from between her bloodied lips. The armor on her back split under 4 devastating blows, but her awakened ability stopped the obsidian weapons from doing serious harm. She mustered all of her strength and lifted the obsidian giant into the air, not too high, but just enough to rob him of any leverage. And away we go. Twisting her spine, Effie bent backwards and threw the Titan over herself, performing a messy suplex. Of course, she didn't slam the obsidian giant into the ground. She slammed him into the crawling horror. The world shuddered, deep fissures opening in the cracked earth. And by the time the 2 battered Titans recovered, a graceful winged shadow fell on them from above, followed by an eerie song that washed over their bodies like a crushing wave. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.